person we choose.
And look, it's not just about the person, it's about the policies writ large. And then look, what we saw before, for instance, Secretary Noem had this policy that required her approval for anything that was going out the door, grants, funding, when it over $100,000. And I'll be honest with you, it was disastrous. It held up so much of the funding to FEMA and other parts of DHS. Senator Peters and I did a review of this. Over 1,000 FEMA contracts, grants, and disaster assistance awards were delayed. So I wanted to ask you if you can commit to revoking this $100,000 policy by Secretary Noem. Senator Mullen, thanks for coming out here. I wanted to just start. Secretary Noem said in a cabinet meeting about almost exactly a year ago today that we should be eliminating FEMA. Can you commit to us here that you don't support that approach and you wouldn't attempt to eliminate FEMA?
As I said, I think it needs to be restructured, not eliminated.
I think there is going to be bipartisan support for reforms. I think we all understand that. We certainly saw a lot of problems when it came to Superstorm Sandy. I asked Secretary Noem to work with us, especially as they were going about their FEMA Review Council. I'll be honest with you, that never materialized. We did not see the kind of engagement here that we're ready to have. We have a bipartisan group of senators that want to come up with reforms. Is that something you can commit to working with us on?
Senator, I think all of us that's been either in the House or in the Senate always complain about the outreach of agencies. I will make a commitment to you that I'm going to have the best. It's going to take a couple months to stand it up, but we're going to have a ledge affairs shop that you're going to know who the person is. We're going to work with you. But most importantly, I think everybody on this dais has my personal cell phone. That cell phone isn't going to change. And if you call me, you're going to get a response. If you text me, we're going to get a response.
So when we have this FEMA Review Council report finally come out, is that something you'll come to us first and engage with us on rather than just implementing straight out from the executive branch on your own?
Senator, I'm pretty sure that you guys set the policies and the mission for FEMA. So for any serious changes, it may take actually policy changes. And I will be in your office talking to you about it.
I appreciate that. But we've seen a lot of significant problems happen. For instance, we saw about 2,400 staff cuts at FEMA. And again, we're not talking about the reforms, but we're talking about those that are trying to respond to these disasters every single day. So I wanted to ask if you're confirmed if you will stop these dangerous staff cuts that have reduced FEMA's disaster readiness.
Senator, I'm not trying to play politics, but what's been the biggest disaster is not funding them 3 times in a year. However, some of these agencies under the current administration, not some, all of them got very bloated with having too many.
You think there's still too many staff at FEMA?
Senator, I can't answer that. When I get there, we'll be adequately staffed to respond to our nation's disasters. But it's going to take some time to get there because, like I said, people are quitting today because they're not getting paid for the 3rd time in a year, and we can't allow that to take place.
I agree, and I hope that we can move forward on that. But one thing that has demonstrated a lack of priority by this administration is the fact that we never actually had a full nominee for FEMA. So I just wanted to ask, do you agree that we need an actual nominee to be a full FEMA administrator that has real experience in emergency management?
Absolutely. We're already looking at some in the case that we do get confirmed, which I'm hopeful we do. We are making that a priority in each one of our agencies. But the confirmation also has to go through you, and we know.
I get it, but at least we can get a nominee before us, and I think that that's something I hope to take away. That is a commitment you'll make.
Honestly, by the experience that I've had, which has been an interesting experience, it's a lot to ask someone, and they got to be fully committed. If they go through this process, it's tough. So I would ask you if I do this, give them a fair shake. For me, a lot of you guys aren't giving me a fair shake to even earn your support. So if I bring somebody else into you, maybe you'll give them a fair shake and you'll actually work with them because I'm going to find somebody that is capable of doing the job, that's smarter at me at doing the job, that has experience doing the job. But when they come to your office and ask for your support, don't tell them it's politics. Don't say I can't. Don't say that, hey, I supported the previous one, but, I got burned on that one, so I can't support you. We'll trust, but see, just give them a fair opportunity, and you might actually like the person we choose.
And look, it's not just about the person. It's about the policies writ large. And then, look, what we saw before, for instance, Secretary Noem had this policy that required her approval for anything that was going out the door, grants, funding, when it over $100,000. And I'll be honest with you, it was disastrous. It held up so much of the funding to FEMA and other parts of DHS. Senator Peters and I did a review of this. Over 1,000 FEMA contracts, grants, and disaster assistance awards were delayed. So I wanted to ask you if you can commit to revoking this $100,000 policy by Secretary Noem.
Sir, we talked in your office about that, and absolutely. That's called micromanaging, and I don't know if Secretary put that in or someone else did. I'm not a micromanager. We put people in. We empower them to make decisions. What is required to come up to my level will make decisions. We will have a very clear line of communication with every one of our agency's heads on their authority that is given to you that you gave to them within their parameters, and we'll discuss. But we're also going to be very responsible for the taxpayer dollars. But it's unrealistic to some degree.
It's just adding so much red tape, though. I mean, they could have delayed, especially when it came to disaster response down with the Texas floods. want to switch gears here. This is something you remember we talked about, but we have this effort right now. ICE has purchased a warehouse in Roxbury, New Jersey. It's a facility the size of 8 football fields to house over 1,500 detainees. Never once did an ICE official go and talk to the local mayor, talk to the local law enforcement, assess the situation alongside the locals. So I just wanted to ask you, is that fair that DHS is imposing these types of large-scale detention facilities without local engagement and input?
Sir, being from small rural Oklahoma, it's a big impact, and the community should be visited with, especially when you start taking a warehouse off. It takes it off the tax roll, which can make a huge impact, and you got to deal with impact aid if they're eligible for it. And then you got to talk about infrastructure. One thing I do know is construction. When you start talking about infrastructure on these places, a warehouse sprinkler system is much smaller than when you are housing individuals there. And if you say, I think you said the town has 60,000 people, and I believe you said this was
smaller than that.
Is it smaller than that? So
about 22,000 people,
okay, and
of
the
which the detainees and the staff there would constitute about 10% of the population of that town.
Yeah, and realistically, it's not. Most municipalities don't have the capacity in their infrastructure for waste and water. So it's important that we're talking to the communities, and if we're having additional needs, we can work with the cities, we can work with the municipalities, but we should always communicate with them.
I agree with that. And this town has only 42 police officers, a volunteer fire department. Does that sound like the kind of town that has the resources to take on a warehouse of this magnitude?
Sir, I don't know the circumstances behind this other than what you and I talked about. I committed to you when I visited with you in your office. We'll talk. I even said, let's you and I get on the phone with the mayor. If I'm confirmed, I'll make a trip out there and see it for myself, because it's a big concern of yours, and we want to address those concerns. And if it's not practical, but I also said it's got to be, there may be a specific reason why it's there. If I can't explain that to you, then that's a different story. But if there's a specific reason I can explain it to you to make you make sense, let's talk about it. But if not, then maybe we can be better partners.
I'm glad that you commit to talking about it. There are some documents I asked ICE to send us about their evaluations of the warehouse. We have still yet to get it. Will you commit that that is something that we can get?
Yeah, the documents are available. Yes, but I've also offered something much better. I'll go with you personally and look at it.
That's something that the local community will appreciate, and I hope that you will reassess this warehouse.
As I said in my opening statements, we want to protect the homeland, but we also want peace of mind and bring back confidence to the Department of Homeland Security. And all this means that we got to work on that, and I will work on that.
Senator Scott.
The tension in that moment was unmistakable. When Senator Andy Kim pressed forward, seeking clarity, seeking commitment, seeking reassurance that FEMA would not be dismantled or weakened, what followed was not just a policy exchange. It was a window into something deeper, a glimpse into how power speaks when pressed, and how accountability begins to surface when the stakes are no longer abstract but real. "I'm not trying to play politics," Senator Markwayne Mullin said. A simple sentence. But in Washington, those words often carry more weight than they first appear to. Because in a hearing room like this, where every word is measured, every pause calculated, and every answer scrutinized, the line between policy and politics is never as clear as it seems. What unfolded in this exchange was not just a debate about FEMA, an agency tasked with responding to the nation's most urgent crises. It was a broader confrontation over responsibility, over preparedness, over whether the systems designed to protect the American people are being strengthened or quietly stretched to their limits. Senator Kim's questions were direct, focused, grounded in recent reality. He pointed to staffing cuts, to delays, to decisions that, in moments of national emergency, could mean the difference between order and chaos, between readiness and vulnerability. His concern was not theoretical. It was rooted in the understanding that when disaster strikes, there is no margin for hesitation. No room for bureaucratic delay. And yet, the response revealed a different perspective, a narrative of overexpansion, of agencies growing beyond their intended scope, of a system that, in the eyes of some, has become inefficient, weighed down by its own scale. Mullin's argument was not one of elimination, but of restructuring, of recalibration, of trying to find balance in a system that many believe has drifted from its original mission. But here is where the tension sharpens, because when we talk about restructuring an agency like FEMA, we are not talking about abstract numbers on a page. We are talking about people, about communities, about families who, in their most vulnerable moments, depend on the speed, clarity, and effectiveness of federal response. We are talking about trust. Trust that when something goes wrong, when the unexpected becomes reality, there will be a system in place that works. Not eventually, not after delays, but immediately. And this is what Senator Kim was pushing toward. Not just reform, but reassurance. Not just promises, but accountability. His questions reflected a growing concern that decisions made behind closed doors, staff reductions, policy bottlenecks, lack of communication, are beginning to erode that trust. The exchange also revealed something else, something often overlooked in the noise of political debate: the quiet struggle between branches of government. When Mullen pointed out that Congress sets the policies and mission for FEMA, it was a reminder that responsibility does not rest in one place alone. That the effectiveness of any agency is not just determined by its leadership, but by the collaboration, or lack of it, between those who write the rules and those who execute them. And yet, collaboration itself became part of the issue. Kim described a lack of engagement, a FEMA review process that never fully materialized into meaningful dialogue, a system where decisions seemed to move forward without the level of coordination that such high-stakes policy demands. In response, Mullen offered something both simple and symbolic: his personal cell phone. A promise of accessibility, of direct communication. A gesture that, in another context, might seem informal. But here, it carried a deeper implication that perhaps the formal channels of governance are no longer enough, that trust now requires something more immediate, more personal. But is that enough? Because governance is not built on individual access alone. It is built on systems, on processes that function regardless of who holds the phone or who answers the call. And this brings us to the broader picture. What this moment reveals is not just disagreement over FEMA, it reveals a system under pressure. A system trying to reconcile competing priorities, efficiency versus readiness, oversight versus autonomy, reform versus stability. It reveals a government grappling with its own complexity. On one side, there is the argument for streamlining, for cutting through what is seen as excess, for reshaping agencies to be leaner, faster, more focused. On the other side, there is the warning that in the pursuit of efficiency, something essential may be lost. That reducing capacity in critical moments does not create strength, it creates risk. And in between these two positions lies the American public, watching, waiting, hoping that when the next crisis comes, and it will come, the system will be ready. Because at the end of the day, this is not about politics. It is about preparedness. It is about whether the institutions designed to serve the people are being reinforced or quietly weakened under the weight of competing agendas. The hearing room may fall silent, the exchange may end, but the questions it raised do not disappear. They linger, they echo, and they demand answers, because leadership is not defined by words spoken under pressure. It is defined by decisions made when no one is watching, by actions taken before the crisis begins, by whether those in power choose to prioritize readiness over rhetoric, substance over symbolism. In moments like this, the truth does not arrive all at once. It reveals itself in fragments, in exchanges, in the tension between what is said and what is left unsaid. And it is up to all of us to listen, to question, to demand more. Because accountability is not a single moment. It is a continuous process, and democracy depends on it. If you believe in transparency, if you believe in holding power to account, then stay informed, stay engaged, and support the work that brings these moments into the light. Subscribe to Liberty Report USA.
People being targeted. You should hate this. When you're walking into Target, they had ICE officers pulling people aside because they looked like they were immigrants and checking their papers. You know what that does to a Jew? You know what that means to just check people's papers because of how they look? You should hate that. So for me,
Ohio is recognized.
So I actually would like to continue exactly the theme that my colleague from Vermont brought up. Except I think before we talk about artificial intelligence, we should talk about natural intelligence. And it absolutely goes against natural intelligence for us to sit here in this chamber knowing that we have 260,000 working American families who work for our government, who are doing their job and not getting paid. That, to me, is the crisis we should be talking about. And yes, I agree with my colleague from Vermont. We should not be worried about Mr. Musk or any of the other billionaires going hungry. I worry about our TSA agents going hungry. I worry about our Coast Guard people going hungry. I worry about the people at FEMA going hungry. And yet, with total disregard for over 250,000 families, we sit in this chamber and we're getting paid. Everybody here is getting paid, and yet they're not. And I applaud my colleague from Vermont who's walking out of the floor, caring about working Americans. Why don't we care about them? Why don't we fund DHS now? Why don't we worry about those families who, by the way, according to the last Secretary of Homeland Security, the last one said, and I'm going to quote here, the average TSA agent lives paycheck to paycheck. We've taken away 3 paychecks. 3 paychecks we've taken away from them. If there's ever a time that we need to fund DHS, it's now. This is not a Republican secretary saying that. It's a Democrat Secretary of Homeland Security saying that. I don't understand how in a leadership role, which is what we are here in the United States Senate, we would allow the suffering of 260,000 families to go with this much contempt and instead fund DHS in its entirety. Allow those families to get paid. Mr. President, you were a business guy like I was. Could you ever look at yourself in the mirror when you owned your businesses and know because of your actions the people who worked for you weren't getting paid and were suffering? It's impossible. I remember when I started my first business, I felt the weight of success because I had to take care of my family. But those early families for that first business that I bought, every day I walked in, I felt this incredible responsibility. Like, man, if I made bad decisions, like if I make a bad decision today, people will go hungry who work for me. And that drove me to succeed. We are totally disconnected here. We sit here in this chamber, it doesn't even touch any of us. And I think that's a disgrace. I think we should very simply do what's always been done before we became this hyper-partisan chamber. We fund the government responsibly. And then, if we have policy disagreements, we can sit down. By the way, right now, just down this hallway, there is Democrat colleagues and Republican colleagues of good faith sitting down to negotiate differences to get the Department of Homeland Security funded. We have American citizens that are paying taxes to fund a government to work that is not working. I know that sometimes pleading with my colleagues to have some level of humanity is ineffective, because quite frankly, maybe this place takes a little humanity away from you. Maybe you don't see how these decisions affect many, many people. So with that, Mr. President, I'm going to ask a very, very, very simple request. Very simple. I'm going to ask unanimous consent that this body, the United States Senate, proceed to immediate consideration of calendar number 156, H.R. 4553. I further ask that the substitute amendment at the desk be considered and agreed to, the bill as amended be considered and read a third time and passed, and that the motions to be considered be made and laid upon the table. And what this means in English to the person who may be watching is this funds the entire Department of Homeland Security for 2 weeks. Everybody gets paid up to date. We get the department open, and then let the work that's being done now proceed. I ask that happen.
Is there an objection? Senator from Michigan is recognized.
Mr. President, I object. And I think, look, all of us here understand, because we travel twice a week, what TSA is going through. That's why we should immediately today fully fund TSA. If you care about paying TSA, let's pay TSA today. Oh, I'm sorry. I object. If we want to actually pay TSA, let's do it right now. My colleague from Ohio, we both know what it's like to go back and forth to the Midwest every single week. Want to fund TSA? Want to have humanity for the people who are securing us? Let's fully fund them today.
So I'm not sure.
Senator from Ohio.
Mr. President, sorry about that. I'm not sure what I just heard, because I just offered to fund TSA. I just offered to fund the Coast Guard, FEMA, Customs and Border Patrol, Secret Service, the Federal Law Enforcement Training Centers, USCIS, Homeland Security Investigations. So let's do it for 2 weeks. Let's do that for 2 weeks. Down the hall, there are senators of good faith that are getting together to end this political charade. So to my colleague, I will yield the floor for a simple question. Why would you want to fund just TSA and not the Coast Guard? Not, for example, in your state, The American Immigration Council is that deals with 102,700 undocumented immigrants in Michigan. Why wouldn't you want enforcement around that? Why wouldn't you want to fund the department that allows people like me, who when I was 18 years old applied for citizenship? Why wouldn't we want to fund 3,300 employees, some of them in your state, that actually process legal immigrants? Like, why wouldn't we fund that? Why wouldn't we fund 7,000 special agents that are there to stop transnational criminals? Why wouldn't we fund 200 employees that fund, and you were a CIA agent, that fund biological nuclear threat prevention? Why wouldn't we do that? Why wouldn't we fund 60,000 employees at Customs? You care a lot about the bridge that was hopefully due to be opened from Canada. You need Border Patrol agents there. You need Customs there. Why wouldn't we fund that? Why wouldn't we do that? Why wouldn't we do that? Why wouldn't we do that for 2 weeks? 2 weeks. And then we can get together. Why wouldn't we do that? Why just fund one narrow slice of the Department of Homeland Security? I'm just curious why you would do that.
Will the senator yield? So here's the thing. I think
Michigan's recognized.
I'm sorry, pardon me. I think it is not hard to notice that right now our country is going through a pretty fundamental conversation about the role of ICE and law enforcement in our city streets. We know that it's a cultural conversation in the United States of America because the previous Secretary of Homeland Security got fired because of the disaster that went on in Minneapolis. I sat, as you did, in the hearing with Mark Wayne Mullen yesterday because we need a new Secretary of Homeland Security. Every American in the world, Democrat and Republican, understands that's because ICE so deeply contradicted American values in our American cities. So we're having a full-on cultural conversation about the role of law enforcement in our streets. In the meantime, you and I can agree every day of the week on the role of Border Patrol, CBP, FEMA, which we desperately need, Coast Guard, which no one has more Coast Guard pretty much than Michigan. So I'm ready to fund those things now. But I don't think we can ignore the fact that ICE is right now an unsettled issue in the United States of America. We're not settled. People are negotiating because we're not settled. And even this week, the President of the United States sent a letter down here to talk about the reforms he acknowledges we need in some form or fashion. Now, some of those reforms to me are like basic and don't go far enough, like we won't deport American citizens. But even the President acknowledges we have a problem with ICE. So let's excise that one part that we are having an American conversation on, and then fully fund the other stuff here and now today. That's what I'm proposing.
Will you yield for a question?
Of course.
Thank you. Look, I appreciate, and I know you're a person of good character, by the way. I genuinely believe that. But that's not what you're asking for. You're asking to fund just TSA. But meaning, the question is this. Why would we use 260,000 people and their families as pawns in a negotiation? Why wouldn't we pay all those people? So will you consider adding a bill that I've put together that says that as long as we haven't fully funded the government, we get money taken out of our paychecks, not held in suspension, that we actually would lose compensation, about $500 a day, every day that goes by where we haven't fully funded the government? Would you consider adding that to your resolution?
Will you yield?
You have the floor.
Sorry, I don't know the rules here, but sorry, Mr. Speaker, if you have to.
The Senator from Michigan is recognized.
Thank you. So first of all,
President is enjoying this debate.
I am proposing today just the UC on TSA, but my colleagues, one after another, have proposed funding the Coast Guard, Border Patrol, FEMA. So whichever way we want to do the package, individually or all but ICE, I'm here for it. And I'll do you one better on your proposal. I 100% agree. When I first came into Congress in 2019, we were in a government shutdown in the first Trump administration, right? President Trump had a shutdown. That's how I came into Congress. And my very first bill as a congressperson, bipartisan, by the way, the Problem Solvers Caucus, a bunch of us did it, was that if the government isn't fully funded, then congresspeople, A, do not get paid, and B, I'll go one further, are not allowed to have government pay for their travel back home, meaning they have to sit their butts down in Washington and negotiate and get it done then and there without taking taxpayer dollars to go back home. So whether you want to add a $500 fee, whatever it is, this body is for appropriating money. So I'm here for whatever you want to propose. But I think you have to acknowledge, even the president acknowledges at this point, that the American public, Democrat, Independent, and Republican, does not like American citizens being killed in our streets. They do not like going into a human being's home without a judicial warrant. They don't like children being taken and tear gassed and caught in the crossfire. Non-well-trained officers pulling people out of cars and getting into dangerous situations, people being targeted. You should hate this. When you're walking into Target, they had ICE officers pulling people aside because they looked like they were immigrants and checking their papers. You know what that does to a Jew? You know what that means to just check people's papers because of how they look? You should hate that. So for me, whether we agree or disagree, and I would hope we'd agree on the use of force in America, set that aside, fund everything else today, now, here, penalize members of the Senate who want to go home and ignore the problem. I'm with you on that. But you are holding all of those agencies hostage because of ICE. You are defending them and not allowing them to get their paycheck. You are holding them back from those 3 paychecks, not Democrats. We are here ready to pay. You are so protective of ICE, so protective of this president that you will not fund the other parts of DHS, and that is our Homeland Security. I know about that. That is my entire life. You know, you care about that. I know you do, Senator. So please, just excise the thing we're not agreeing on, fund the rest of it, let's get on with it, and understand that the American public have made their voice clear on this issue.
We yield for
Senator from Ohio is recognized.
So, Homeland Investigations is part of ICE. It's 7,000 special agents that work for ICE that stop transnational criminals. You're not suggesting that we not fund them, are you?
I'm suggesting that we get everybody in a room. Sorry, if I can yield. That we get everyone in a room on Homelands on the ICE issue. Lock them in a room here in the Capitol. Our negotiators. I need the president to send his envoy so we can actually make some decisions. It has been hard to negotiate with Senate Republicans on this issue because they need the blessing of the White House. Get all the players in a room. We will sit down. I'll do it. I'll be here all day and all night, all weekend. But I got to tell you, you can't use one group of people as a shield to not fund all the other border missions, all the other funding of the FEMA. You can't do it.
So one more question, with your permission. So nobody on your side has agreed to fund USCIS. You have not suggested that. USCIS is an independent part of the Department of Homeland Security. That has not been suggested by any Democrat. I appreciate that you are. Nobody has agreed to fund the Bioweapons of Mass Destruction Agency. Not been suggested. And you've specifically, meaning not you personally, the Democrat senators have specifically said they do not want to fund customs, which you understand really well what customs means, and border protection. Like that, these agencies that are listed on this board, there has been no movement among Democrats to fund this. And this is why my point is the same. I'm not suggesting to my colleague from Michigan at all that we permanently fund this forever. What I'm saying is 2 weeks. Let's reopen the Department of Homeland Security for 2 weeks. Let's let people of good faith, you and I, look, we agree on what you said. Let's take our paychecks away. Let's prevent us from flying home. Let's make us, I'll use your words, keep our butts here until we get this done. If that means today, tomorrow, Saturday, Sunday, we can play pickleball in between. It'll be fantastic, okay? But we don't leave. If that means right through Easter, by the way, we do not leave this chamber. And we do not get, and we lose pay every day that goes by until we've funded the whole thing, because we can work it out. We can work this out. But I look at some of your colleagues who said they're serene as to where we are on this. I don't think there's 260,000 families that are serene about this, and I don't think you are either. So again, I would just ask that you amend your resolution to say let's fund the entire department for 2 weeks. We don't want to defund ICE. I'm not hearing you say that. I hear some of your other colleagues say that, but we're not looking to defund ICE, and we're certainly not going to stop Homeland Investigations. Let's fund the whole thing for 2 weeks. Let's get the American people to understand we can get things done. Let's not absolutely leave, forget D.C., let's not leave this chamber, the Capitol, until we get this done. That's my ask, that's my plea.
Sir from Michigan.
I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of Calendar 362 S4127, that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Ohio is recognized.
Reserving my right to object, just to be clear what was just proposed. What was just proposed is to fund just TSA. Nothing else. Nothing else. And what's wrong with that, in case you didn't hear the peanut gallery, what's wrong with that is that there's hundreds of thousands of other government employees who, for no fault of their own, they did nothing wrong. They didn't do anything to do with what happened in Minneapolis. No role in that whatsoever. They go to work every day, doing the best they can to keep us safe. Mr. President, yesterday, for the first time in my life, I attended a dignified transfer ceremony in Dover. I'm thinking to myself, these 3 Ohioans, what did they die for? They died to preserve freedom for us. They didn't ask any questions. They went willingly. They volunteered. Can we honor their sacrifice by saying, do the right thing. Fund the Department of Homeland Security for 2 weeks. Senators, stay here without pay, not held pay, docked pay, because we haven't done our job. Article 1, we are the power of the purse. So I would ask one last time before concluding this. Can I get my colleague from Michigan, who's a good person, to agree to amend her proposal to fund the entire Department of Homeland Security for 2 weeks and then force every senator, and I think that she has the influence to convince her colleagues to stay here without pay until this gets done.
Is there objection to the request?
Yeah.
I repeat, is there an objection to the request?
Yes.
I object. I don't.
The objection is heard. Is there an objection to the original request?
I, with a broken heart, object. And we did not do the right thing for the American people today, Mr. President. It's a shame. Politics got in the way of helping working Americans. It's a disgrace.
The objection is heard.
What began as a procedural exchange on the Senate floor turned into something far more revealing. A moment where the machinery of government collided head-on with the human cost of political deadlock. Senator Bernie Moreno stood in that chamber and posed a simple, uncomfortable question. Why are 260,000 American families expected to carry the burden of Washington's failure? 3 missed paychecks. Hundreds of thousands of workers showing up every day, doing their jobs, protecting the country, and not being paid. And then, just as the tension reached its peak, Senator Elissa Slotkin objected. Not to the suffering, not to the urgency, but to the terms. That single objection didn't just halt a motion. It exposed a deeper fracture, one that runs through the core of modern American governance. Because this wasn't just about funding the Department of Homeland Security. It wasn't even just about TSA agents, Coast Guard members, FEMA responders, or border personnel. It was about priorities. About what happens when political leverage becomes more important than immediate responsibility. And about what kind of leadership emerges when compromise is no longer the default, but the exception. Moreno's argument was grounded in something fundamental. The idea that government has a duty to those who serve it. That when Americans agree to work for their country, there is an unspoken promise. You will be paid for your labor. You will be supported. You will not be used as a bargaining chip in a political negotiation. And yet, in that chamber, that promise seemed negotiable. Slotkin, for her part, didn't deny the urgency. She didn't dismiss the workers. Instead, she reframed the debate, drawing a line around one specific agency, ICE, and arguing that unresolved concerns about its role justified withholding broader funding. In her view, this wasn't obstruction, it was accountability. A stand against policies that, in her words, conflicted with American values. And that is where the conflict becomes more than procedural, it becomes philosophical. Because what we witnessed was not just a disagreement over a funding bill, it was a clash between 2 competing visions of governance. One that prioritizes immediate action, fund everything now, fix the disagreements later, and another that insists certain issues cannot be separated. That funding decisions are inseparable from the policies they enable. But in the middle of that debate are real people, not abstractions, not talking points. Workers who wake up every morning and go to jobs that still demand everything from them, vigilance, discipline, responsibility, while receiving nothing in return. And that reality raises a question far bigger than this single debate. At what point does strategy become neglect? Because when elected officials argue over leverage and principles, the consequences don't remain in the chamber. They ripple outward, into households, into communities, into lives that depend on stability. Moreno tried to cut through that. His proposal was temporary, 2 weeks, a bridge, a pause in the conflict to ensure people were paid while negotiations continued. Not a resolution to the broader debate, but a recognition that some responsibilities cannot wait. And yet, even that compromise failed. Slotkin countered with her own proposals, funding certain agencies immediately, penalizing members of Congress for inaction, forcing lawmakers to stay in Washington until a deal is reached. In many ways, both sides acknowledge the same underlying truth. The system is broken when it allows this to happen at all. But acknowledgement is not resolution. What this moment ultimately reveals is a system under strain, where even shared goals can't overcome political division, where both sides claim to defend the American people, yet disagree fundamentally on how to do it, and where the cost of that disagreement is measured not in headlines, but in the quiet strain on families waiting for their next paycheck. This is the paradox of modern governance. The louder the debate about values, the harder it becomes to deliver basic results. And perhaps the most striking moment of all was not the objection itself, but the tone that followed. Moreno's appeal, asking whether anyone in that chamber could look in the mirror knowing their decisions left workers unpaid. Slotkin's response, insisting that accountability and reform could not be postponed. Two arguments, both rooted in conviction, both claiming moral ground, and yet unable to meet in the middle. That is the story here. Not just conflict, but disconnection, a growing gap between the urgency of real-world consequences and the pace of political agreement. Because at the end of the day, governance is not just about principles. It is about outcomes, about whether the system works for the people it is meant to serve. And in this moment, for 260,000 families, it didn't. The question now is not who won that exchange. It's whether moments like this are becoming the norm, whether the system can still respond when it matters most, and whether those in power remember that behind every policy debate are people whose lives do not pause while Washington negotiates, because leadership is not tested when it is easy. It is tested in moments like this, when the right decision is also the hardest one to make. And the American people are watching to see who acts, who compromises, who delivers, and who allows politics to take precedence over responsibility. In the end, this wasn't just a debate about funding. It was a reflection of the state of American leadership itself, and that's why it matters. If you believe accountability should never come at the expense of working Americans, if you believe leadership means acting when it counts, then stay informed, stay engaged, and support our work. Subscribe to Liberty Report USA.
You know, the country has seen the videos, okay? So I find it outrageous that you would sit here today and hold open the idea that they were domestic terrorists. Their parents and their loved ones deserve an apology from the U.S. government.
Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman.
I apologize.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wolf, if I could start with you. You would agree that in America, people have the right to peacefully protest under the First Amendment, right?
Correct.
You would agree that people have the constitutional right to due process, right?
Correct.
Would you agree with Kristi Noem, who characterized Renee Good as a domestic terrorist? Is Renee Good a domestic terrorist in your view?
I've been very clear on this point when that incident occurred, as well as the Preddy incident as well, is to let that investigation play out before any comments are made about the motives of any of the individuals involved, including the law enforcement officers.
So clearly it was wrong to label them domestic terrorists, right?
Again, I'm not at the department. I don't know what the information she had. If you're asking me my opinion, I would have waited till the investigation play out before I rendered any decision.
So you think it's still an open question as to whether or not they're domestic terrorists?
Again, I'm going to let the investigation
It sounds like
play
you
out.
do, which I think, you know, the country has seen the videos, okay? So I find it outrageous that you would sit here today and hold open the idea that they were domestic terrorists. Their parents and their loved ones deserve an apology from the U.S. government. And I find it outrageous that you're taking the position that you are
I'm not
here
taking
today.
that position.
Yes, you are. By taking no position and leaving on the table the notion that they're domestic terrorists, you are taking a position. Mr. Beer, thank you for emphasizing the big lie that what the Trump administration is doing is going after the worst of the worst. As Senator Merkley pointed out, and as you've shown, that's just not true. I mean, nobody wants people who are here illegally committing violent crimes. But the overwhelming majority of people who are in detention right now by ICE's own admission, pose no risk to public safety. Is that right?
That's right. Over 70% were given no threat level at all. They could be released right now without a threat to the public.
Yeah. So this is just such a big lie. I mean, that's what we're seeing playing out in this forum and out of the White House from people like Stephen Miller and the President of the United States. Could you talk about another big lie? We do know that the so-called big beautiful bill, as Republicans called it, increased the debt massively, like over $4 trillion, right? They gave tax cuts to billionaires permanently. They cut health programs. They cut food safety, food programs. They had a walloping increase for ICE, like 7 times its regular budget. And at the same time, we hear people like Stevie Miller and others claiming that it's actually immigrants who are the cause of increasing our deficits and debt. In fact, they've said that immigration is the cause of the growing national debt, and immigrants take more from the country than they contribute. Now, Mr. Beer, you've looked at this question very closely. Could you just respond to what I think is the second big lie?
Yeah, over the last 30 years, we looked at all the government budgets, federal, state, and local combined. Immigrants reduced deficits by $14.5 trillion, which is about a third of all of the total deficits during that period of time. And it's easy to understand why, because they work at 12 percentage points higher than the national average. They use less benefits because they're subject to constraints, unique barriers to applying for those benefits, in particular Social Security and Medicare, where those are by far our largest programs, and they're not eligible for those at all if they're here in the country illegally, or if they came legally and they don't have a sufficient work history to qualify. So you have clear reasons for believing that they are reducing the deficits and debt. They are a benefit to this country, and we need more people who are going to contribute in the future as our population ages.
Could you amplify a little more on the issue of Medicare and Social Security? Because those, trust funds in just a couple years, there won't, be enough to pay out full on the dollar for Social Security and Medicare.
That's
As
right.
you pointed out, there are many immigrants that are paying in to that, but not paying out. So could you just elaborate on that?
According to the Social Security Administration, we need about 35 million more workers in order to keep revenues equal to expenses by the middle of the 2030s. So we are at a position right now where immigration is not going to solve it. Obviously, it's not going to solve it, but it is moving us in the right direction. These are people who are showing up. They're ready to work. They're often prime age individuals who are ready to enter the labor force. So it's a huge benefit fiscally to the United States to have these people who want to contribute to our country.
Thank you. And thank you for exposing 2 of the big lies coming out of the Trump administration.
Thank you.
In that moment, Senator Chris Van Hollen leaned forward and asked a question that cut straight through the noise. No hedging, no ambiguity. Were Renee Good and Alex Pretty domestic terrorists or not? What followed was not clarity. It was hesitation, a refusal to draw a line, a careful retreat into process. Let the investigation play out. Even as the weight of that label hung in the air. And in that silence, in that unwillingness to answer directly, something far more revealing emerged than any yes or no ever could. Because this moment was never just about 2 names. It was about the power of the state to define reality, to assign labels that carry consequences far beyond a courtroom, to shape how the public sees individuals before the facts are fully known. Van Hollen didn't let it pass. He pushed. He forced the contradiction into the open. Because when a government official refuses to reject a label as serious as domestic terrorist, even in the absence of confirmed evidence, that hesitation becomes its own kind of answer. Not spoken, but understood. And that is where the tension lies. In a system built on constitutional rights, on due process, on the presumption that facts must come before judgment, what happens when labels come first? What happens when narratives are formed before investigations are complete? The senator's frustration wasn't just political, it was moral. It was rooted in a deeper principle, that the power of government must be exercised with precision, not assumption. When Van Hollen said that the families deserve an apology, he wasn't simply defending individuals. He was defending a standard, a line that should never be crossed. Because once a government begins to apply its most serious labels without certainty, it risks eroding the very foundation it claims to protect. And then, without pause, the conversation widened. What began as a question about 2 individuals became a broader indictment of policy, of messaging, of an entire narrative surrounding enforcement. The claim that authorities are targeting the worst of the worst. The assertion that those in detention pose a threat to public safety. These are not small claims. They shape public opinion. They justify massive expansions of power. But as testimony revealed, the data told a different story. Over 70%, no threat level assigned. Individuals who, by the government's own admission, could be released without posing a risk. That is not a marginal detail. That is a fundamental contradiction. And in that contradiction lies a deeper question. If the narrative does not match the reality, then what is driving the policy? This is where the hearing moved beyond individual cases and into something much larger. Because the issue is not only about enforcement, it is about trust, about whether the public can rely on its leaders to present facts honestly. About whether decisions that affect millions are grounded in reality or in rhetoric designed to justify predetermined outcomes. Van Hollen called it a big lie. Strong words, but words that reflect the gravity of what is at stake. And the implications extend even further. The discussion turned to economics, to deficits, to the claim that immigration is a burden on the nation's finances. Again, a powerful narrative, one that influences policy, shapes elections, and drives public debate. But when examined closely, the data revealed something else entirely. Over decades, immigrants have contributed trillions toward reducing deficits. They work at higher rates. They draw fewer benefits. They contribute to systems like Social Security and Medicare, often without receiving the same level of return. These are not abstract statistics. They are measurable realities that challenge the very foundation of the argument being made. And yet, the narrative persists. Why? Because narratives are powerful. They simplify complexity. They create clear lines between right and wrong, between threat and safety, between us and them. But governance is not meant to be simple. It is meant to be accurate. It is meant to be accountable. What we witnessed in this hearing was a collision between those two forces. On one side, the machinery of narrative, broad claims, sweeping labels, simplified explanations. On the other, the demand for evidence, for nuance, for truth. And in between, the American public, watching, listening, trying to determine who to believe. This is the weight of moments like this. They are not just exchanges between officials. They are tests. Tests of whether the system can hold itself accountable. Tests of whether those in power are willing to confront uncomfortable facts. Tests of whether the principles written into the Constitution still guide the decisions made today. Because at its core, this is not about one hearing. It is about a fundamental question. Does truth still matter in governance? If labels can be applied without certainty, if narratives can override data, if hesitation replaces accountability, then the system begins to drift. Slowly, quietly, but unmistakably. And history shows us where that drift can lead. But there is another path. A path where questions like the one Van Hollen asked are not deflected, but answered. Where evidence is not ignored, but examined. Where power is not used to shape perception, but to serve the truth. That path requires vigilance. It requires scrutiny. It requires a public that refuses to look away. Because democracy is not sustained by silence, it is sustained by attention. By moments like this where the questions are asked anyway, where the contradictions are exposed, where the demand for accountability does not fade. And so, as this hearing comes to a close, the question does not end here. It follows us into every decision, every policy. Every statement made in the name of the people. Will truth lead or will narrative prevail? The answer depends on what we choose to see and what we choose to demand. Stay informed, stay engaged, and subscribe to Liberty Report USA.
Were fired because they were involved in the investigation of the document handling by President Trump, not for any behavior issues. Is that your understanding as well?
Again, ma'am, I can't comment on them because those are in pending litigation.
I guess I'm a little...
Ms. Houlihan.
Thank you. My My question is basically starting with some HR questions, and they're first for Director Patel. If you could help me a little bit understand, I come out of the military family as well, but I don't know very much about the FBI's HR process or the growing up of an FBI expert. Could you help me understand how long it takes for a senior counterintelligence expert, especially one maybe focused on a very narrow threat, to be developed? How many years, I guess, would be my question.
Thank you, Congresswoman. That varies. Sometimes right out of Quantico, new agent trainees are placed on the counterintelligence mission set, and some people come in from the fraud section, so the answer varies. It could take a couple months to a couple of years.
And the next question is, when a person comes up in your system in the military, it was always the needs of the Navy or the needs of the Air Force. It was never the needs of the airman or the soldier or the sailor in terms of prioritizing our readiness, in terms of making sure that we met the mission. Is the FBI similar?
It is similar, ma'am. It's a dynamic threat landscape, so we flux and surge based on the CI, CT, cyber threats, and other threats to the homeland, and violent crime mission has seen a surge as well.
So my specific question is that there was a report that came out in February from CNN that the FBI had let go or fired dozens of agents and staff members from a counterintelligence unit tasked with monitoring Iran. And apparently the reason, at least reported in the press, was that these individuals had been involved in the investigation of classified document handling from President Trump at Mar-a-Lago, and that this was the reason why they were summarily let go. First of all, are you aware of those firings, and do you concur with the rationale or reason for those firings?
I'm aware of that, and I know there's a pendency of litigation, so I'm not able to comment on them.
Did you yourself order those firings?
The FBI, every time there is someone who violates their code of conduct or ethical standard, conducts an internal investigation with the careers there, and they present a decision point to me. The Iranian Threat Mission Center has seen an increase of 43% in arrests for Iranian spy actors, so the Iranian Threat Mission Center has never been stronger.
So I'm asking about whether those people were fired because they were involved in the investigation of the document handling by President Trump, not for any behavior issues. Is that your understanding as well?
Again, ma'am, I can't comment on them because those are in pending litigation.
I guess I'm a little stymied here, Director, because it feels as though literally when there was a possible pending war, I'm outside of this intelligence circle in many ways, even though I serve on the Intelligence Committee. You collectively must have been aware when these firings happened that there was a meaningful chance that the U.S. might be engaged with a war in Iran. And having these very expert, super qualified folks summarily dismissed at this time, it just feels like an odd choice in timing. Were you aware at the time that this was going down, that this may end up weakening the mission and the readiness of that group?
The mission, as I stated, has never been stronger when you see a 43% increase in counterintelligence arrests and 21% increase in cyber arrests against the Iranian Threat Mission Center. My focus is on providing the American people the strongest FBI as possible. I don't work on timelines. I work on evidence that's presented to me.
I guess my concern is that it feels as though, and I very much honor the tone and tenor of this hearing, that this is about making sure that that we depoliticize what is the most important thing that we all do, which is keep us safe. And it feels as though this issue is a political issue, and I just am worried that we are taking really good, really qualified people and picking fights with one another across party lines, rather than making sure that we protect ourselves and keep ourselves safe. With the remainder of my time, Director Gabbard, I have a question regarding the fact that the Secretary of the Treasury loosened restrictions this week on Russian oil exports, and now the Russians are able to sell oil again. Did the IC assess that clearing the way for increased Russian oil sales would benefit Moscow, possibly?
I don't believe there's been a formal IC assessment on this topic yet, as it is underway.
So I would highly encourage that, because it feels as though by easing these sanctions, we are directly providing the Kremlin with revenue, the revenue that will be used directly to kill Ukrainian soldiers, and an increased likelihood that Putin will be successful in his war with Ukraine. I thank you for your time, and I yield.
It started not with outrage, not with raised voices, but with a simple, methodical question. One rooted in experience, discipline, and an understanding of how institutions are supposed to function. Representative Chrissy Houlihan, drawing from her own military background, asked Director Kash Patel something deceptively straightforward. How long does it take to build a true counterintelligence expert? The answer came cautiously. A few months? A few years? It varies. But what followed would expose something far more unsettling than any number of years ever could, because this wasn't really about training timelines. It was about value, about what it means to invest in expertise, and then, suddenly, to discard it. As the exchange unfolded, Houlihan turned to the core of the issue, the reported dismissal of dozens of FBI agents and staff members from a unit specifically tasked with monitoring threats tied to Iran. These were not ordinary personnel shifts. These were individuals operating in one of the most sensitive domains of national security. Specialists, analysts, field agents, people whose knowledge cannot be replaced overnight or even within years. And yet, they were gone. When pressed, Director Patel did not deny awareness, but he did not provide clarity either. Instead, he pointed to ongoing litigation, to internal processes, to metrics, a 43% increase in counterintelligence-related arrests, a 21% rise in cyber enforcement activity. Numbers that, on paper, suggest strength, momentum, control. But numbers can tell one story, while reality tells another. Because the question was never just about performance metrics, it was about timing. And timing in this context is everything. Houlihan's concern cut straight to the heart of the matter. These dismissals, she noted, appeared to occur at a moment when global tensions were escalating, when the possibility of direct conflict involving Iran was no longer theoretical, but increasingly real. And in that moment, when expertise should have been preserved, reinforced, and protected, it was instead reduced. It just feels like an odd choice in timing. That line, delivered without theatrics, carried the weight of something deeper. Not accusation, not speculation, but unease. Because in the world of intelligence and national defense, readiness is not built overnight. It is cultivated over years of experience, coordination, and trust. It depends on continuity, on people who understand the patterns, the signals, the subtle indicators that others might miss. When those individuals are removed, the system does not simply reset. It weakens, quietly, incrementally, in ways that are not immediately visible until they are. And yet, Director Patel stood firm. The mission, he insisted, has never been stronger. His focus, he said, is not on timelines, but on evidence, on outcomes. But this is where the tension becomes impossible to ignore. Because governance is not just about outcomes. It is about judgment, about weighing risk against necessity, about understanding that decisions made behind closed doors ripple outward into consequences that affect not just agencies, but entire nations. Houlihan's final remarks brought this tension into sharp focus. She spoke not as a partisan voice, but as someone concerned with something far more fundamental, the integrity of the mission itself. The idea that national security must remain above politics, that protecting the country cannot become entangled in internal conflicts, personal grievances, or shifting allegiances, and yet that is precisely what she feared was happening. It feels as though this issue is a political issue. In that moment, the hearing transcended policy debate. It became a reflection of something larger, a system grappling with its own identity. A question of whether institutions designed to safeguard the nation can remain insulated from the pressures of politics, or whether they are slowly being reshaped by it. Because when decisions about personnel, especially those tied to sensitive investigations, are perceived as politically influenced, trust begins to erode. Not just within the agency, but among the public it serves. And without trust, even the strongest institutions begin to falter. The exchange did not end with resolution. There was no definitive answer, no clear admission, no decisive conclusion. Instead, it ended with something far more powerful: uncertainty. Uncertainty about why these decisions were made, about whether the timing was truly coincidental or something else entirely, about whether the system is functioning as intended or drifting into something more fragile, more unpredictable. And as the hearing moved forward, the implications extended beyond one agency, one decision, or one moment in time. They reached into the very foundation of governance itself. Because at its core, this is not just a story about staffing changes or internal investigations. It is a story about priorities, about whether the focus remains on protecting the nation, or whether it is being diverted by forces that operate outside that mission. It is a story about accountability, about whether those in positions of power are willing or able to fully explain their decisions when the stakes are at their highest. And ultimately, it is a story about the delicate balance between strength and vulnerability within the American system. A system that depends not just on laws and procedures, but on the people who uphold them. The people who dedicate years of their lives to understanding threats that most will never see. The people who operate in silence without recognition to ensure that danger is identified before it becomes reality. When those people are removed, the consequences are not always immediate, but they are always real. And so, as the cameras fade and the hearing adjourns, one question remains, not just for those in the room, but for everyone watching. Are these decisions making the nation stronger, or simply creating the appearance of strength? Because in the end, true security is not measured in percentages or press statements. It is measured in trust, in judgment, in the quiet confidence that the system is working, not for political advantage, but for the safety of the people it was built to protect. And when that confidence begins to waver, everything else follows. This is not just oversight, this is accountability in real time. And the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, must always come to light. Subscribe to Liberty Report USA. Support our work to expose the truth.
Over the weekend, progress was getting made. Then Donald Trump threw a temper tantrum. He demanded Republicans tie. Hello, everybody. And I'm proud to be joined by Senator Murray and Senator Padilla. So, as everyone knows, negotiations continue on DHS funding, including the Coast Guard, FEMA, CISA, while also securing real reforms to rein in ICE and stop the violence. Over the weekend, progress was getting made. Then Donald Trump threw a temper tantrum. He demanded Republicans tie the SAVE Act, voter suppression, to TSA paychecks. It was outrageous from the start. Democrats knew it, and Republicans knew it too. And because of Donald Trump, negotiations started falling apart. That's not just a delay, that's real harm. That's another day TSA workers go without pay. Let's not forget, Democrats have now tried 8 times to pass clean TSA funding. I'm supposed to have a little... Here we are, in case you missed it. Oh, well, here we go. They're always ahead of me. They're a great staff, aren't they? Anyway, we have voted 8 times for funding, and Republicans have blocked funding 8 times. 8 times we asked, no poison pills, no politics, no conditions, just paychecks and public safety. 8 times Republicans blocked it. Instead of paying our TSA agents what they deserve, Republicans have chosen 8 times to keep our airports in chaos. And what does Trump do? He sends ICE agents to airports. ICE agents don't run security lines. They don't screen passengers or move travelers. By all accounts, many are just standing around. So Americans are asking a simple question. People at airports say to one another, why is Trump paying ICE agents overtime to stand around instead of paying TSA workers to move the lines? Makes no sense. Maybe the answer is this: security isn't the goal. And this is something rather pernicious. Hope you've seen it. Steve Bannon said the quiet part out loud, calling using ICE agents at the airports a test run for using ICE in the 2026 election. Can you imagine? It's chilling. ICE should leave the airports. TSA workers should be paid. And Republicans should stop playing games. No intimidation, no more chaos, enough. And let me say one more thing on the SAVE Act. This morning we learned Donald Trump, who constantly attacks vote by mail, used vote by mail himself. Typical Trump hypocrisy. Every day there are more examples. So it's fraud when Americans do it, but fine when he does. Does that make any sense? Does that make any sense at all? That tells you everything you need to know. It's never been about fraud. It's about rigging the election. And now Republicans are trying to dress it up with the so-called common sense voter ID amendment. Don't be fooled. That proposal is a cover-up. It's more extreme than the laws in every single state, red or blue. It overrides state law. It blocks it blocks IDs that millions rely on, students, veterans. You can't even use your military ID under their proposal. And of course, it's a cover-up. They actually just added it into the bill after the bill was done because they knew when people saw it was voter suppression, it would be so unpopular and so poorly received. So Democrats support common sense voter ID, but what Thune put in isn't that. What the bill is voter suppression, plain and simple. Senator Murray.
What began as a routine update on negotiations quickly turned into something far more revealing. Standing before the cameras, Chuck Schumer did not mince words. He described a moment when progress, fragile, incremental, but real, was suddenly disrupted. Negotiations over funding the Department of Homeland Security, including critical agencies like Federal Emergency Management Agency and Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, were moving forward. Then, according to his account, everything changed. A demand was introduced, a condition was imposed. And just like that, the momentum collapsed. The accusation was sharp that Donald Trump intervened not to stabilize negotiations, but to derail them, tying essential funding to the controversial SAVE Act. In Schumer's telling, this was not governance. This was brinkmanship. And the consequences, he argued, were immediate and tangible, not abstract political fallout, but real-world disruption affecting workers, travelers, and the basic functioning of national infrastructure. And that is where this moment becomes more than just political theater. Because at the heart of this exchange is a question that cuts to the core of democratic governance. What happens when essential systems, security, elections, public service, become leverage in a larger political struggle? When paychecks for Transportation Security Administration workers are tied to broader ideological battles, the line between policy and pressure begins to blur. And when that line blurs, trust, already fragile, begins to erode. Schumer laid out a sequence that, if taken at face value, paints a troubling picture. 8 attempts to pass clean funding, 8 blocks. A repeated effort to separate operational necessity from political negotiation, and a repeated refusal to do so. In that repetition, there is a pattern, and in that pattern, there is a signal. That compromise is no longer the objective. Leverage is. But perhaps the most striking image comes not from the numbers, but from the scene itself. Airports, places designed for movement, efficiency, coordination, described instead as spaces of confusion. Immigration and customs enforcement agents present, but not performing the roles travelers expect. Security lines stalled, workers unpaid, and ordinary Americans left asking a simple, almost disarming question. Why? Why allocate resources in a way that appears disconnected from immediate need? Why prioritize one function over another when the imbalance creates visible strain? And perhaps most importantly, what does that say about the priorities guiding these decisions? The answer, at least from Schumer's perspective, is unsettling. He suggested that the goal may not be efficiency at all, that the visible dysfunction might serve another purpose, as a demonstration, a test, or even a message. He invoked comments from Steve Bannon, raising the possibility that the use of federal enforcement presence in public spaces could extend beyond its stated function. Whether one agrees with that interpretation or not, the implication alone is enough to raise serious questions about intent, oversight, and accountability. And then the focus shifts again, this time to elections, to voting, to the rules that govern how citizens participate in the democratic process. Schumer's argument is direct, that measures framed as common sense may, in practice, restrict access. That proposals embedded in larger bills may carry consequences far beyond their stated purpose, and that, in his view, the rhetoric surrounding election integrity may not align with the actions of those promoting it. He points to a contradiction, alleging that the same figure who criticizes certain voting methods has personally used them. And in that contradiction, he sees not just inconsistency, but a broader pattern, a pattern in which rules are applied selectively, in which principles shift depending on circumstance, and in which the language of fairness becomes a tool rather than a standard. This is where the moment takes on its full weight. Because what we are witnessing is not just a disagreement over funding or policy. It is a clash over the meaning of governance itself. Over whether institutions exist to serve the public or to be wielded in pursuit of political advantage. Over whether stability is the goal or merely a byproduct when convenient. In a functioning system, negotiations are expected. Disagreements are inevitable. But there is an underlying assumption that both sides, despite their differences, are working toward a shared objective: keeping the system running. When that assumption begins to break down, when disruption becomes a tactic rather than a consequence, the entire framework begins to shift. And that shift is not always loud. It does not always announce itself with dramatic gestures. Sometimes it appears in smaller moments: a stalled negotiation, an unpaid worker, a question left unanswered in a crowded airport terminal. But taken together, those moments form a pattern. And that pattern tells a story about power, about priorities, about the choices leaders make when faced with competing pressures, and what those choices reveal about the direction of the system as a whole. In the end, this hearing leaves us with more than just competing narratives. It leaves us with a challenge to look beyond the surface, to question not just what is being said, but why it is being said and what it leads to. Because democracy does not depend solely on laws or institutions. It depends on trust, on accountability, on the belief that those in power are acting, at the very least, within a framework that respects the system they are part of. And when that belief begins to falter, the consequences are not immediate, but they are real. The question now is not just who is right in this moment. The question is, what kind of system emerges if these patterns continue? Because in the end, it is not a single hearing that defines a democracy, but the principles that guide it when no one is watching. If you believe in holding power accountable, if you believe in exposing the truth behind the headlines, then stay informed, stay engaged, and subscribe to Liberty Report USA.
I know, you know, he said, Donald Trump said, you know, I may have a plan or I may not. For a war? Whoa. Here's people's lives are at stake. Billions are being spent on an almost daily basis. And he says, you know, I may have a plan or I may not. Mr. President.
To recognize the minority leader.
Mr. President, could we have some order, please?
Senate will be in order.
Thank you. Mr. President, we in quorum? Mr. President, the Senate is in session once again this weekend, and once again Republicans are doing nothing productive. Yesterday, instead of considering legislation to tackle inflation or end the war in Iran, MAGA Republicans wasted Senate floor time on a radical culture war amendment that went nowhere. It failed, and it accomplished nothing. A total waste of time with nothing to show for it. And yesterday, Republicans once again blocked the Senate's ability to finally start paying our TSA workers. These workers have gone now for weeks without pay. They work around the clock. They keep our airports running. And Republicans had the chance to pay them once again, and they refused. They refused. And the bottom line is, this was the first time we saw yes or no votes from Republicans on an amendment that simply said, pay them. Don't wait, as the Republicans are saying, till we resolve all the other issues in ICE. It simply said, pay them now, and they said no. And that shows you when they're voting yes on amendments that won't actually pay them because they can't pass, it won't pass because it's tied to all the other complications in ICE, including the desire that American people have that we must have warrants when you bust into someone's home, that the police should not wear masks. They say they'll only vote for TSA agents if we get rid of those things, if we don't make sure they have to wear masks. That's fake. That's not really helping TSA workers. Our amendment did. They all voted no, but we're going to keep at it. I say this to TSA workers. I say this to people at the airports who are waiting online ungodly hours. We will keep doing this until the Republicans see the light, feel the pressure, that they are holding up payment, and relent. Now, today, Donald Trump and Homan are saying they will deploy ICE agents to airports starting on Monday. This is really disturbing. ICE agents who are untrained and have caused problems everywhere they've gone, lurking at our airports, that's asking for trouble. And it will certainly make the chaos at the airports even worse. No one has any faith in ICE agents. They haven't received training. They don't know what it is to be a TSA person and do what you need to do there. And the real problem here is they have no plan for using these ICE agents. Trump says send them there, they send them there, and Homan says they're still drawing up plans with less than a day's notice. What is this? We know what it is. It's another impulsive action by Donald Trump. Some idea pops into his head, and he announces it. And then the people working for him, a few of whom do have some degree of talent and ability, not many, underlings, they have to rush to try and implement what they know is an idiotic plan. In this case, it's a plan that has no planning. It's another impulsive action from Donald Trump. When he acts impulsively, there's usually, whenever Donald Trump acts impulsively with no follow-through, there's trouble. ICE agents will be asked to do things they are not trained to do. They don't know how to perform core TSA screening functions. Travelers will be on edge with federal agents looking over their shoulders. All they will do is worsen the situation at airports, which are already on edge. So I have an idea for Donald Trump. Instead of sending ICE agents to harass travelers at airports, why doesn't Trump get his act together and agree to pay the TSA workers and get the Senate Republicans to do so? Now, let's talk about the disastrous war in Iran, causing so much havoc, so much chaos, and raising everybody's gas prices and prices on so much else. Here's what Donald Trump said on Friday about the war. I know, you know, he said, Donald Trump said, you know, I may have a plan or I may not. For a war? Whoa. Here's people's lives are at stake. Billions are being spent on an almost daily basis. And he says, you know, I may have a plan or I may not. These are the words of the commander-in-chief in the middle of a war involving one of the most dangerous regimes on earth. I have a plan or I may not. That's unhinged and dangerous. Lives are on the line. The president says he may not even have a plan. Tens of billions are being wasted. No plan. Troops being killed and injured. No plan. Civilians being killed and injured. No plan. Gasoline costs $3.94 a gallon on average. And Trump, I have no plan. Or I may not have a plan, which means none. What does Donald Trump do? He lifts sanctions on two of the states that are enemies to us in so many ways, Iran and Russia, so they can go after our own troops and allies. Lifting sanctions on Iran and Russia so they can go after our troops and our allies. It's the dictionary definition of asinine. Donald Trump's military strategy is like watching a snake eat its own tail. This war needs to come to an end. Secretary Rubio, Secretary Hegseth, and other cabinet officials must come before the Senate and testify under oath in public to explain why we're in this mess and what the goal even is. Even some Republicans are openly admitting they have no clue what the administration is trying to accomplish in the Middle East. Enough is enough. The American people do not want a war with Iran that has no end. They do not want to see our troops deployed again and again to the Middle East, and they don't want to just have a knot in their stomach every time they pull up to the gas pump, and soon enough the grocery store as well, because of the higher prices caused by this war. It must come to an end. I yield the floor.
The chamber had already grown restless. Voices echoed across the Senate floor, papers shuffled, conversations murmured beneath the surface of formal procedure. And then, in the middle of it all, the minority leader of the United States Senate stood and delivered a message that cut through the noise with unmistakable force. Enough is enough. With those words, Chuck Schumer drew a line, one not only directed at Donald Trump and his administration, but at the growing tension surrounding America's expanding military engagement with Iran. This moment inside the Senate was not simply another exchange of partisan criticism. It was something deeper. a window into the fragile balance of power that defines the American system of government. And in that moment, Schumer was raising a question that echoes throughout American history. Who is truly accountable when the nation moves toward war? Standing before the chamber, Schumer laid out a picture of dysfunction and urgency. He spoke about Senate gridlock, about legislation stalled while political theater dominated the floor. He pointed to the failure to resolve immediate issues, like paying TSA workers who keep America's airports operating, while the nation simultaneously faces a growing military conflict abroad. The contrast could not have been sharper. On one side, the everyday responsibilities of government. Workers waiting for pay, travelers standing in long lines at airports, citizens expecting stability from their leaders. On the other side, the immense gravity of military decisions unfolding thousands of miles away. And in Schumer's view, those priorities were dangerously misaligned, because when the discussion turned to the conflict involving Iran, his tone shifted from frustration to alarm. He quoted a statement attributed to President Trump, words suggesting uncertainty about whether a clear strategy even existed. I may have a plan, or I may not. For Schumer, those words were more than a troubling remark. They represented what he described as the absence of direction in one of the most consequential decisions any administration can make. War demands clarity, strategy, accountability. The stakes are measured not only in dollars and diplomatic consequences, but in human lives, international stability, and the long shadow of history. Throughout the speech, Schumer connected these concerns to a broader pattern he believes has defined Trump's leadership style. Impulsive decisions followed by rushed attempts by officials to implement them. He described a government scrambling to catch up with announcements made before the groundwork had been laid. Whether one agrees with that criticism or not, the larger debate it represents is undeniable. At its core lies one of the oldest tensions in American democracy: the balance between presidential authority and congressional oversight. The Constitution grants Congress the power to declare war. Yet, modern conflicts often emerge through executive decisions that move faster than legislative debate. And in moments like this, those tensions rise to the surface. Schumer argued that the current situation in Iran reflects exactly that kind of imbalance. A conflict expanding without a clearly articulated endgame. Billions of dollars flowing toward military operations, troops deployed in a volatile region, global markets reacting, energy prices rising. Meanwhile, lawmakers from both parties are still asking fundamental questions. What is the objective? How long will it last? And what does success even look like? Those questions are not new. They echo through the history of American military engagements, from Vietnam to Iraq to Afghanistan, conflicts where early decisions shaped decades of consequences. And that is why moments like this Senate speech carry weight beyond the immediate headlines. Because when a leader stands in the Senate chamber and declares enough is enough, it signals more than political disagreement. It signals a growing demand for transparency and accountability at the highest levels of government. Schumer's call was direct. He demanded that top administration officials, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio, appear before Congress and explain the strategy behind the current conflict. Not behind closed doors, not through vague statements, but publicly, under oath, before the American people. That demand reflects a fundamental principle of democratic governance, that power must be accompanied by explanation. Citizens have the right to understand why their nation is engaged in conflict. They deserve to know the risks being taken in their name. They deserve to hear the strategy that guides those decisions. Without that clarity, trust begins to erode. And when trust erodes, the entire foundation of democratic leadership begins to weaken. Yet even as Schumer delivered his criticism, another truth remained visible inside that chamber. The United States Senate itself, the arena where these arguments unfold, remains one of the central pillars of American democracy. It is where disagreements are aired, decisions are challenged, and leaders are held to account. Sometimes loudly, sometimes imperfectly, but always publicly. And that transparency is what allows the American system to function even in moments of profound tension. Because the power of democracy does not lie in the absence of conflict. It lies in the ability to confront that conflict openly, to question authority, to demand answers, and to insist that decisions, especially those involving war and peace, are not made in silence. The debate over Iran will continue. The policies of the Trump administration will continue to be defended by some and criticized by others. That is the nature of a democratic republic. But what matters most is that the questions are asked, that the scrutiny remains constant, and that those entrusted with power are reminded again and again that they answer not only to each other inside the halls of government, but to the American people themselves. Because leadership is not measured only by the authority to act, it is measured by the willingness to explain those actions and the courage to face the consequences when they are questioned. And in moments like the one we just witnessed on the Senate floor, the deeper truth of American democracy becomes clear. Power must always meet accountability. Authority must always meet oversight. And when the stakes involve war, national security, and the lives of those who serve, the demand for answers becomes not just political, but moral. That is why moments like this matter. And that is why we continue to watch. If you believe in transparency, accountability, and the power of informed citizens, make sure you stay with us. Subscribe to Liberty Report USA and support our work to bring you the moments that shape the future of American leadership.
If he didn't know about it 2 or 3 days later when all of America did, and he's not lying, which I believe he is, then what chaos? What's going on in this administration? The commander-in-chief on something that affects policy while we're at war says he doesn't know about it? That talks about the chaos and confusion. There's so much to talk about. Donald Trump and the Republicans are screwing up America in so many ways. So let's talk about Iran for a minute. Donald Trump, on Iran, as the war on Iran continues, Donald Trump does what he usually does. He lies. He's lying to the American people. According to public reporting, preliminary intelligence reports suggest tragically that American operations may have been involved, unfortunately, in this horrible missile strike on the all-girls elementary school in Iran on the first day of the war. And when Donald Trump was asked about those reports, what did he say? He said, "Well, I don't know about that." That's ridiculous, and it's an obvious lie. Donald Trump's the commander-in-chief, and he expects us to believe that he has no clue about intelligence regarding a horrific attack on a school several days after it occurred. The vast majority of Americans obviously won't believe Donald Trump. They know he's an inveterate liar. He lies daily. They will know when he says he didn't know about this report. Of course he did. But there might be a handful of Americans who still might believe the guy, that don't understand that he's an inveterate liar. And so think about that. He is saying he has zero clue about a basic intelligence report regarding this strike. If he didn't know about it 2 or 3 days later when all of America did, and he's not lying, which I believe he is, then what chaos? What's going on in this administration? The commander-in-chief on something that affects policy while we're at war says he doesn't know about it? That talks about the chaos and confusion that have taken over this administration. The idea that something is all jumbled up in the White House, that there's no information flow to the president on something so important. So either Donald Trump is lying when he says he knows nothing about the school bombing intelligence findings, he gets these reports every day, or he's dangerously uninformed, which says his staff is really screwed up. Equally unacceptable is Donald Trump's apparent miscalculation when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz. In the early days of this war, Donald Trump bragged that victory would come easily. We're going to win shortly, no time, no problem. But now, after the United States has damaged so much of Iran's infrastructure, the new radical supreme leader is focusing on the one point of leverage Iran has always had over the world economy, the Strait of Hormuz. A few moments ago, in his first public comments as supreme leader, Khamenei, who's even worse than his predecessor, his father, said Iran will continue to block the Strait of Hormuz. Freeing it could potentially, America, require boots on the ground. How did Donald Trump not see this coming? How did his planners not see this coming? This is the one bit of leverage Iran has. Of course we knew they were going to use it. They've used it in the past. A college student with a basic understanding of geopolitics could tell you that Iran's greatest leverage is this narrow passage through which a huge share of the world's oil must travel. And now, 13 days after we're into the war, I believe it is 13 days, the administration is scrambling to contain the damage and deal with rising oil prices. And Trump, Donald Trump, just by saying, oh, the war's going to end soon, you're not going to fix the shortage of oil or fertilizer or other products in America. As I said for days, after I said for days that he should, Donald Trump finally announced he's tapping the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Should have done it sooner. But in any case, even this decision was marred by chaos and confusion. It caught our allies completely off guard, because for days it seemed Trump would hold back. There's such disorganization and chaos when we're in a war. You can't afford chaos in a war. I don't know of any other time America went to war and things were so chaotic. There is not a single strategic decision that Trump has made in this war that was not born from chaos, confusion, misinformation, and lies. And there is nobody up there in the White House around him willing to stand up and tell him when he was wrong. In his first term, Trump had Kelly, Trump had Mattis, people who had courage, who had backbones, who had military backgrounds, and they told him the truth. He eventually fired them for telling the truth, but they told him the truth. Where is the truth teller now? No one's there, and America is paying the price, unfortunately, in lives, and the eight brave troops we lost, in fortune. They said the first 2 days of the first week of the war cost $11 billion. We could fix a lot of health care with that $11 billion. And in strength. This has gone too far, with too much chaos, too little thought, and it's hurting America. I yield the floor.
The chamber had barely settled when Senator Chuck Schumer rose to deliver a moment that would echo far beyond the walls of Congress. His words cut through the tension of a nation watching a conflict unfold in real time. Referring to new intelligence reports suggesting that American operations may have been linked to a devastating strike on a girls' elementary school in Iran, Schumer pointed to a statement from Donald Trump that stunned many observers. The president had said he didn't know about it. For Schumer, the statement was not just a passing remark. It was a symbol of something deeper, something that strikes at the heart of democratic accountability during war. Because in the American system, the commander-in-chief is not merely a distant observer. The president is the ultimate authority over military operations, intelligence briefings, and national security decisions. When an incident of this magnitude occurs, especially during a conflict as volatile as the unfolding confrontation with Iran, the expectation is clear. The president must know. And if he does not, the implications are equally troubling. Standing on the Senate floor, Schumer framed the moment as a stark choice between two unsettling possibilities. Either the president knew about the intelligence report and was misleading the public, or the president truly did not know, which would raise profound questions about how information flows inside the White House during wartime. Both possibilities carry consequences. In moments of conflict, the world watches every signal that comes from Washington. Allies listen carefully for signs of stability and leadership. Adversaries search for hints of hesitation or disorder. And the American people, whose sons and daughters wear the uniform, whose economy rises and falls with the tides of global events, expect clarity from those entrusted with power. But Schumer's remarks did not stop with the controversy over intelligence briefings. He broadened the lens to the wider strategic landscape of the war itself. One of the most critical flashpoints in the global energy system, the Strait of Hormuz, had suddenly become central to the crisis. For decades, geopolitical analysts have warned about this narrow passage of water. Nearly a fifth of the world's oil supply flows through that corridor. Any disruption there sends shockwaves through global markets, raising prices and triggering economic uncertainty far beyond the Middle East. And yet, as Schumer pointed out in his remarks, Iran's leverage over the strait has been understood for generations. Military planners, historians, and students of international relations have studied it for years. The possibility that Iran might attempt to block or disrupt shipping there is not a new scenario. It is one of the oldest strategic calculations in the region, which is why the unfolding developments have raised urgent questions in Washington. If this was always the most predictable pressure point in the conflict, why did it appear to catch policymakers off guard? Why did oil prices surge before the administration announced emergency measures, including tapping the Strategic Petroleum Reserve? To Schumer, these events painted a picture of a government reacting to crisis rather than anticipating it, a system responding to consequences instead of preparing for them. War has always tested leadership in the harshest possible way. In times of peace, political disputes can remain confined to speeches, press conferences, and election campaigns. But when a nation is at war, every decision carries weight far beyond the political arena. Strategy becomes reality. Words become consequences. Throughout American history, from the darkest days of World War II to the tense decades of the Cold War, presidents have faced moments when the responsibility of command weighed heavily on every choice they made. Information had to flow quickly. Advisors had to speak honestly. And leaders had to make decisions with both strength and humility. Schumer's speech suggested that something in that chain may be breaking down. He recalled that in earlier years, even during fierce political disagreements, presidents often surrounded themselves with advisors willing to challenge them, to question assumptions, and to provide hard truths when necessary. That kind of counsel, he implied, can be the difference between a calculated strategy and a chaotic reaction. Because war is unforgiving, it does not pause for confusion. It does not wait for miscommunication to resolve itself. And in the modern world, where satellite imagery, intelligence reports, and economic indicators travel across the globe in seconds, the margin for uncertainty grows smaller with every passing day. As the Senate chamber fell quiet and Schumer concluded his remarks, the larger question remained hanging in the air. What does this moment reveal about leadership in the midst of crisis? For some, it raises concerns about transparency. For others, it highlights the fragile balance between political rhetoric and the realities of command. But for the American people watching these events unfold, the issue is even more fundamental. Trust. Trust that leaders understand the gravity of their decisions. Trust that intelligence is being taken seriously. Trust that strategy is guided by foresight rather than confusion. In a democracy, accountability does not end when conflict begins. In many ways, it becomes even more important because the stakes are no longer abstract debates or political victories. The stakes are lives, stability, and the credibility of a nation on the world stage. Moments like the one we witnessed in the Senate remind us that democracy is not a silent system. It is a living conversation, a debate about power, responsibility, and truth. And that conversation must continue, especially when the world grows uncertain. Because the strength of America has never rested solely on its military power or its economic influence. It has rested on something deeper. The belief that leadership must answer to the people. And when questions arise, whether about intelligence reports, strategic decisions, or the conduct of war, those questions must be asked openly, fearlessly, and without hesitation. That is the duty of a free society. And that is why moments like this matter. If you believe in transparency, accountability, and the importance of informed citizens in a democracy, stay with us. Subscribe to Liberty Report USA and support our work as we continue to examine the decisions that shape our nation and the world.
Since then, we've seen the Justice Department break the law and continue to hide the truth from the American people. Let me be blunt. There's a massive cover-up going on in the Justice Department to protect Donald Trump and people. It's afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you all for coming. I'm joined by Senators Durbin, Merkley, Gallego, and that's it. We may have a few more coming. Well, it's been 99 days since Congress passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act. The American people sent Donald Trump a clear and simple demand: release the Epstein files. Donald Trump said he wants to turn the page on the Epstein files. Democrats are not going to let Donald Trump turn the page. It was not a suggestion, not a request. The law requires the DOJ to release all the files, not just some of the files, not just the ones they pick and choose and want to do. Since then, we've seen the Justice Department break the law and continue to hide the truth from the American people. Let me be blunt. There's a massive cover-up going on in the Justice Department to protect Donald Trump and people associated with Jeffrey Epstein. As we expected, Trump, Bondi, and their minions have played games with the release of these files. They release some documents that they want to release and continue to hide others. The American people see right through it, and they're all asking the obvious question, what is Bondi trying to hide? President Trump, what are you trying to hide? That's the question the American people are asking. Senate Democrats' Epstein Working Group, including my colleagues here with me, have been preparing for this very scenario. We saw what they were doing. And so we're working with victims' attorneys, we're working with legal experts, we're working with people very familiar with this case to ensure full compliance of the law. We know the administration's withholding some documents unlawfully. Yesterday, news outlets reported that several memos detailing a woman's accusation against the president from when she was a minor have been withheld from the public. We know they're abusing redactions to hide the truth. Hundreds of pages are completely blacked out. Co-conspirator identities remain hidden while survivors have been exposed. We're here today to put a shot across the bow with the Department of Justice and the Trump administration that we are going to reveal this massive cover-up. We will not rest. It's an all-out oversight effort. We're going to pull on every thread. We're going to chase every lead. We'll talk with whistleblowers. We will get to the truth. Our working group Senate Democrats will go review the unredacted files in the coming days. Let me repeat that. Our working group Senate Democrats will go review the unredacted files in the coming days. Pam Bondi should listen carefully. The truth will come out. The whole ugly truth about what she's doing to protect people in the files will come out. The whole world is going to know exactly what she knew, when she knew it, and what she did to cover it up. Democrats are going to hold Pam Bondi and everyone involved at the DOJ accountable for this cover-up. Today we are demanding that the Department of Justice and the FBI preserve records on what transpired behind the scenes. We want to know who was involved in the decision to hide the truth. And a warning to the Trump cronies working on this, we will know if you are destroying documents and evidence, you will not outrun the law. You will not outrun the truth. This isn't political. The survivors deserve the truth, and the American people are demanding it. Democrats and Republicans agree the American people deserve the truth. So Donald Trump, stop hiding, stop delaying, come clean with the American people, and if you don't, Democrats will make sure that the truth comes out. Our next speaker is Senator Durbin.
Thanks, Senator Schumer. With the Epstein files, the Trump administration had an opportunity to secure a win for survivors, for accountability, and for transparency. But after mishandling the files for a year, it took an act of Congress to force Pam Bondi and Kash Patel to even consider providing justice. Even after the passage of the Epstein Files Transparency Act, the Trump administration decided to violate federal law to protect the rich and powerful. The law required DOJ to produce the files by December 19th, yet the vast majority of those files were not produced until January 30th, 42 days later. Department of Justice has violated the legislation's protection for victims by publishing records without redacting personally identifiable information of victims, including nude photos where their names and faces could be identified. In sharp contrast, other produced records heavily redacted information identifying powerful business and political figures who are alleged conspirators or material witnesses to Epstein's crimes. Violations of the Epstein Files Transparency Act continue as the Department of Justice has yet to produce all Epstein-related records required by law and has removed thousands of records from the website beyond those that inappropriately identify victims. Keep in mind, a whistleblower told my office that FBI agents reviewing the Epstein files were instructed to flag any records that mentioned President Donald Trump. This disclosure is even more damning in light of yesterday's bombshell. The New York Times report that the Justice Department failed to disclose documents related to a woman who alleged that Trump sexually assaulted her when she was a minor. Simply put, Pam Bondi and Kash Patel have mismanaged these records during their tenure in office. That is why, as ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, I'm joining our leader, Charles Schumer, in a letter to the Justice Department and FBI requesting the preservation of records related to the management of the Epstein files over the course of the Trump administration. Preserving federal records and safeguarding information critical to congressional oversight is a legal obligation that all department employees are required to meet. As I told General Bondi during last year's Judiciary Committee oversight hearing, quote, eventually you're going to have to answer for your conduct in this. You won't do it today, but eventually you will. The survivors deserve better. It's clear that Donald Trump and his Republican enablers are executing a cover-up and conceal strategy. Heads are rolling at the highest levels of the United Kingdom. Will heads roll in the United States? When will the Trump administration come clean with the survivors and the American people? The sooner, the better. Next, I believe Senator Blumenthal can't make it.
He's not here yet. He's at another hearing. Senator
Murphy.
The Epstein Files Transparency Act that I introduced with Ben Ray Lujan in the Senate was crystal clear. No record shall be withheld, delayed, or redacted on the basis of any of the following: embarrassment, reputational harm, political sensitivity, including any government official, public figure, or foreign dignitary. Well, here we are. Those 99 days have passed, and what we have seen is the files have not been released according to the law. We have seen that victims' names and photos that were supposed to be redacted weren't redacted, and all kinds of redactions appear to have occurred for folks who are potential perpetrators. And we're seeing the Epstein files reverberate across the world. The Prime Minister of Norway, the former ambassador from Britain to the United States, King Charles' brother. But what about here in the United States of America? Why is there no accountability here in the United States of America for these atrocious crimes, the place where they occurred? We know that there were about 6 million pages, of which only somewhat more than 3 million have been released. We want those other 3 million released. And among them are these 50 pages that entail, as the New York Times said, claims made in 2019 by a woman who came forward after Mr. Epstein's arrest to say she'd been sexually assaulted by both Mr. Trump and Epstein when she was 13 to 15 years old. And it goes on to say that there were 4 interviews with this woman, and only one of those interviews was released. Where are the other 3? Now, we know the other 3 exist because they are in the index. And yet, the pages are missing. How can anyone justify that these interviews have not been released? So that is a massive cover-up by this administration. It's a massive and unacceptable cover-up. We also know from the Telegraph that there are 6 secret storage units rented across the country by Epstein that may have contained information that the Department of Justice hasn't apparently attempted to retrieve. By unanimous consent, the Senate said, yes, we passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Senator Schumer came forward and tried to strengthen that act with some real penalties, and the Republican whip objected. Well, if Republicans were with us on seeking full disclosure, why object to putting more teeth into this bill? We all together, Democrats and Republicans, should be saying yes on transparency for the public, yes on accountability for the perpetrators, and yes for the closest thing we can get to justice for the victims.
Senator Gallego has been relentless on this issue. Senator Gallego.
Thank you. As we stated, princes, CEOs, the most powerful men in the world are being held accountable everywhere except the United States, where we are supposed to be a country of equal justice under the law. We are actually proving quite the opposite. You know, what we're proving here right now, what the Republicans are proving right now with the help of Donald Trump and Attorney General Pam Bondi, is that if you are part of the Epstein class, if you are rich enough, you are powerful enough, you can do some really horrific things. Raping children, raping women, engaging in sex trafficking. And this administration, the Republicans, will engage in an active cover-up for you. And even more so, now we're getting more reports of some real serious allegations of this president from a minor, a woman who was a minor, that is accusing the president of some very serious crimes. The American public deserves to know what happened, who was involved, not just President Trump, but everyone else involved, all these powerful men that are still walking around the United States right now. We're only talking about a couple years removed, a decade removed from a lot of these allegations. These men are still in power. These men are still potentially victimizing women, victimizing children. And the fact that this administration is actively covering up past crimes potentially means they're covering up current crimes. It's time for us to have full transparency. It's time for us to have accountability. It's time for us to throw some people in jail that did some really horrible stuff against kids in this country. And the fact that Donald Trump and the Republicans, after talking a big game for so many years about going after pedophiles, are actively covering up for pedophiles right now should tell you exactly what is wrong with this administration. I, unfortunately, going to have to go read those redacted files next week. It's one of those things that you don't want to do. The disgusting nature of what I'm going to find on there is going to, probably make me very ill. But because we have an administration that's actively covering up for pedophiles, we have to take the step, and we have to take the step to keep them accountable and to expose all these pedophiles that are still in power right now all over this country. Thank you.
And just one more point, which this article from the New York Times shows. More and more keeps coming out, and the more that comes out, the more we see how large their cover-up has been. Questions on the subject? But yes, in the back. Yeah, we're all going together. Yeah, I mentioned that in my remarks. Yes. Yeah. Yes. I don't know if we're going to. We're all going, and we have set up appointments to go. Yes.
Leader Schumer, you asked for unanimous consent on the floor a few weeks ago. Whip Barrasso objected. What is your floor strategy moving forward to kind of get Senate action on this?
Well, the bottom line is the Republicans all voted for it, every single one, and we're going to keep at it. We're going to use every strategy we can, going to the Justice Department, seeking lawsuits, as well as whatever legislative strategies will work. Yes.
Over on the House side, the Clintons are being deposed starting today and tomorrow in the Epstein investigation. Just your general reaction into that.
Look, all the truth should come out, period. Yes.
Thank you, Senator Schumer from the Italian National TV. Just two quick questions. One, do you also see a difference between the treatment that this case has been happening in Europe and here in the
As my colleagues well outlined, I agree.
Okay. Second question, how do you react to people who say that Democrats and Republicans are enacting a new form of McCarthyism, basically judging guilty by association, whether it is in the email or...
Yeah, all we want is the truth. The truth.
Is there any danger of...
Yes.
Is there any effort to reach out to the woman who made the claim against President Trump?
There will be efforts to reach out to everyone who's willing to come forward and speak. And do you want to talk about that?
I think I mentioned in my remarks.
Yeah.
Both lead a letter on preserving evidence and witnesses.
Yeah, so we can get it. Yes.
When you see the unredacted documents, what can the public expect from you to inform them? Can you do anything to inform them?
Well, we're not going to prejudge. Let's see what's in the documents. We want to protect people's identities, but we also want the truth to come out, and we will walk that line with great vigor. Yes.
There are an additional 3 million files that have not been released, and many, it seems, of the files that have been released remain redacted or have parts redacted. So what steps are you taking to ensure that those redactions are unredacted?
Yeah, we're going to demand justification for any redactions, and if the redactions are cover-ups as opposed to protecting identities, we're going to get to the bottom of it. We're going to get to the bottom of it. Okay? Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
The moment was unmistakable. Standing before cameras and colleagues, Chuck Schumer did not soften his words, did not hedge his claims, and did not leave room for ambiguity. He declared that what the American people were witnessing was not delay, not bureaucratic friction, but something far more serious, a deliberate effort to conceal information tied to the Epstein files. A massive cover-up, he called it. And in that instant, the hearing transformed from routine oversight into a confrontation over truth itself. What followed only deepened the gravity of the moment. As Schumer questioned why key documents remained hidden and why redactions appeared selective, the focus shifted squarely onto the United States Department of Justice, an institution designed to stand as the neutral enforcer of the law. Yet here, it was being accused of doing the opposite, of choosing what to reveal and what to keep from public view, of potentially shielding powerful figures, including Donald Trump, from scrutiny. Then came Dick Durbin, reinforcing the claim with a detailed account of missed deadlines, withheld materials, and what he described as a troubling imbalance, where victims' identities were exposed while the names of influential individuals remained obscured. His words were measured, but the implications were severe. If true, this was not just mismanagement. It was a distortion of justice itself. And that is where the deeper meaning of this moment begins to unfold. Because this is not only about documents or timelines or even a single case. It is about the fragile contract between a government and its people. A contract built on the belief that the law is applied equally, regardless of status. That institutions act not in defense of individuals, but in defense of principles. When that belief is shaken, the consequences extend far beyond any one hearing room. What we are witnessing here is a collision between power and accountability. On one side, elected officials demanding full transparency, invoking legislation like the Epstein Files Transparency Act as a binding obligation, not a suggestion. On the other, an executive apparatus accused of resisting that obligation, of navigating within the gray areas of compliance, releasing some information while withholding the rest. This tension is not new. It echoes through history, through every moment when oversight meets resistance. But what makes this instance particularly striking is the scale of the allegations and the global attention surrounding them. As Durbin noted, figures connected to this case have faced consequences in other parts of the world. And yet, in the United States, the country that defines itself by the rule of law, the question remains unresolved. Why here does accountability appear incomplete? That question lingers. It hangs over every statement, every redacted page, every missing document referenced in the hearing. It is the question that transforms this from a political dispute into a moral inquiry. Because at its core, this is about whether truth is being pursued or managed. The senator spoke of millions of pages, of interviews that exist but have not been fully disclosed, of evidence that may still sit beyond public reach. They spoke of whistleblowers, of internal instructions, of decisions made behind closed doors. And with each revelation, the picture becomes more complex and more unsettling. If institutions tasked with enforcing the law are perceived as selective in their transparency, the damage is not immediate, but it is cumulative. Trust erodes slowly, quietly. Until one day, it becomes difficult to distinguish between skepticism and certainty. And yet, within this tension lies a critical function of democracy itself: oversight. The ability of one branch of government to question another, to demand answers, to compel disclosure. This is not dysfunction, it is design. It is the mechanism through which truth is tested and power is challenged. And in moments like this, that mechanism is pushed to its limits because the stakes are no longer abstract. They are human. They are tied to individuals who have waited years for clarity, to a public that expects answers not filtered through politics, but grounded in fact, to a system that must prove again and again that it serves the law, not the powerful. The language used in this hearing was sharp, at times confrontational. But beneath it was something more enduring, a recognition that transparency is not optional, that accountability cannot be partial, that justice, if it is to mean anything, must be consistent. And so the question moves beyond the chamber. Will the full truth emerge? Will institutions respond with openness or retreat further into silence? Will accountability reach every level it is meant to? These are not questions that can be answered in a single hearing. They unfold over time through actions, through disclosures, through the willingness or refusal to confront what lies beneath the surface. But one thing is certain, moments like this define the trajectory of trust in a democracy. They reveal whether the system bends under pressure or holds. They show whether power is shielded or scrutinized. And they remind us that the pursuit of truth is not a single event, but an ongoing responsibility. The senators made it clear they intend to keep pressing, to examine the unredacted files, to follow every lead. Whether that effort uncovers clarity or deepens controversy remains to be seen. But the demand has been made, publicly, forcefully. And now the country watches, because in the end, this is not just about what is hidden, it is about whether it will remain hidden. The truth has a way of surfacing. The question is not if, but when. And when it does, it will not only reveal facts, it will reveal the character of the system that tried to contain it. Stay informed, stay engaged. And if you believe in holding power accountable, in uncovering what others would prefer to keep buried, then follow this story as it unfolds. Subscribe to Liberty Report USA.
The war in Iran. Well, first and foremost, it's outrageous that this is a unilateral war started by one person, the president, when the Constitution clearly says a war, especially something of this magnitude involving 15 countries, not only affecting the region.
Senator, so let's start with that, what interview I just did with Ambassador Mike Waltz. What did you think? Was there anything you reacted to in terms of his view of the war in Iran?
Well, first and foremost, it's outrageous that this is a unilateral war started by one person, the president, when the Constitution clearly says a war, especially something of this magnitude involving 15 countries, not only affecting the region, but really from the war in Ukraine to our posture and positioning in Asia. We have a massive undertaking right now that has not come to Congress. In addition to that, the president said he was going to focus on costs of the American people. He is driving them up. So not only did he cut millions of people's health care, not only has he taken steps through his tariffs that are driving up costs and driving out small businesses, but now he's doing something that is further increasing the pain of American people. So why hasn't this come before Congress? Why are Republicans just lying down and doing nothing and allowing this president to do whatever he wants? You say gumming up the works. I say trying to get the Senate back to doing its job, and Senate Republicans not being a lapdog for the president, but actually doing their constitutional duty.
So you've called the war with Iran unconstitutional, and you're working with other Democrats to file a new war powers resolution to rein Trump in. Past war powers resolutions, as you know, have failed because of a lack of Republican support. Do you have any Republican buy-in here other than Rand Paul?
Well, let's just put it this way. The Senate should not be operating as business as usual. I mean,
because of the war.
Because of the war and because of the extreme crises we have in the country right now. Remember, millions and millions of Americans are going to lose health care as a result of their failure to extend the Obamacare subsidies. But the other $1 trillion they cut out of Medicaid is going to cause another big crisis. If you talk to any Americans, look at any poll, this is what they're concerned about: rising costs, loss of health care, and more. And so here's the Senate, which swore, as we've seen by the Constitution, which is supposed to provide checks and balances, oversight, accountability to an executive out of control, that has done none of that. And so from its military, everything from the beginning when they were using signal to send out war plans to even now, Republicans time and time again don't do their constitutional duty of checks and balances, oversight. What they do, though, is just lean over an advanced form of yoga, bending over backwards to do whatever the president wants.
Yeah. Presidents on both sides of the aisle have authorized serious military operations without seeking the authorization of Congress. As I don't need to tell you, the actual last time the Congress declared war was World War II.
Right.
Korea was a police action. Vietnam was a conflict. President Obama didn't seek authorization before engaging in military action in Libya in 2011. Wouldn't you say that Congress, regardless of party, has kind of self-emasculated itself when it comes to this? I mean, it's taken away its own powers and ceded it to the executive branch, mainly because they don't want to be on record pro or con for any war.
Well, listen, I'm going to be one of those Democrats that say I think both parties have been feckless in allowing the growth of the power of the presidency. But let's put this into perspective. Nothing Obama did, nothing Trump did even in his first term, or in any way relation to what we're seeing right now. The biggest military engagement of our country since the war in Afghanistan. Literally, you see with what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz right now, as the biggest gumming up of the oil markets we've ever seen. The consequences strategically for us moving so many assets in the region means that we're endangering the assets we have necessarily in, potentially in other areas. This is a massive military undertaking, costing American taxpayers billions and billions of dollars, and tragically costing 13 lives. So I understand past presidents have drifted and taken power from the Article 1 branch of government. But at this scale, at this magnitude, at this cost, why is Congress just laying down and doing nothing? Because if we allow this to happen, then we give Trump the permission to say, okay, finish with Venezuela. I went to Iran. Now I'm going to go to Cuba. Now I'm going to go to North Korea. It is outrageous and never conceived of that we could have this level of a military engagement without the people's house, Congress, doing something about it.
You need 60 votes, right?
Again,
do you even have 50? I mean,
well, again, the chance for success. I really believe what a great faith leader once said: I was called to be faithful, not to be successful. We need people that are going to stand up and fight for the Constitution and stay faithful to the oaths we swore, not be complicit in a reckless, out-of-control president who's causing chaos abroad and rising costs at home. But one more point here. I have seen time and time in my short time in Congress that the power of the people is greater than the people in power. One of the reasons why I want us to make do what the American people want is center this debate in Congress is because it informs the American people and also, I think, can inspire more action. People are giving up on Congress right now because it's not doing its job.
Yeah.
We need to show them that we're fighting in hopes that we'll see more activism as well to hold people to account. As we get closer to the November election, I'm telling you right now, I'm hoping Republicans will find their backbone and realize that Donald Trump is an anchor around the neck of the Republican Party as he's continually to prove to be a liar to the American people, not focused on their costs and their issues, but his adventurism abroad.
So let's turn to domestic issues, because in Michigan this week, an attacker rammed a vehicle full of explosives into a synagogue and preschool, was only preventing from carrying out a mass murder because of the quick action of security officials. Your wife, congratulations on your marriage, by the way, your wife is Jewish. So I'm sure you would have cared about this before, but you have a Jewish wife and presumably will have a Jewish family, so this is personal. Do you think, there's a lot of anti-Semitism on the right and the left, both. Do you think that your party, the leaders of your party, are doing enough to call out anti-Semitism within the Democratic Party?
I think whenever you take hate, no religious group in America has seen the spike of anti-Semitism that we're seeing, but I also see rising hate against other religious groups as well. As soon as you try to lay a partisan lens over it, you weaken the moral call for America to reject hatred. This is outrageous to me that we have allowed a president who is literally saying, when asked about the cost of domestic terrorism at home, saying this might happen, war has costs. That to me shows you again how dangerous Donald Trump is, chaotic, corruption, cruel, and his indifference, it seems, to the crisis going on at home, which is continuing rising attacks. All of us have a moral obligation to stand up against anti-Semitism, to stand up against hate, and to stand up against political violence. And the silence that we have from the White House regarding these tragedies and the growing concerns you even see amongst law enforcement about the security of our home, it's unacceptable to me.
So in terms of the security of our home, there have been a number of attacks. ISIS-inspired bombing attempt in New York City outside Mamdani's house, a shooting target at an ROTC class at Old Dominion, and on and on and on. Meanwhile, the Department of Homeland Security is still shut down because Senate Democrats are blocking the funding bill over the Trump administration's immigration crackdown. Given the security concerns you just expressed, and given the fact that honestly, Secretary Noem has been fired, Tom Homan took over from Greg Bovino and Noem in Minnesota, you could argue Democrats won the debate. Isn't it time for Democrats to reopen and refund DHS?
So first of all, Democrats have tried multiple times to try to get TSA, CISA, the Coast Guard funded. Republicans have refused time and time again to fund.
Yeah, they want the whole agency funded.
They want the whole agency. ICE is still out there doing reckless things in communities. ICE is still arresting and detaining American citizens. ICE is still having unmasked people jumped out of unmarked cars, abducting people from the streets, barreling into homes. Even Americans, even veterans are being swept up in ICE's chaos. I will not approve another dollar for ICE, given all that they're doing. But we should be funding those TSA agents that keep us safe, CISA, Coast Guard, and for Republicans to refuse to do it is unacceptable.
All right, Senator Cory Booker.
And I'll make one last point. It's important, Jake. They have cut the people out of FBI and other agencies that should be protecting our homeland. This is a president that is not keeping America safer. He's making it more dangerous, having lawless people in our communities doing lawless things, and his operations overseas for the things that he's doing there not to be debated in Congress is outrageous. And this is what the work of this week in Congress is going to be, focusing it back on the people's concerns, public safety, and the rising costs.
Democratic Senator Cory Booker, New Jersey, thanks for being here.
In that moment, Cory Booker didn't just raise his voice, he drew a line between constitutional duty and unchecked authority, a line between a nation guided by law and a nation drifting under the weight of unilateral decisions. When he called the war outrageous, when he questioned why Congress had been bypassed, and when he pointed to the rising toll on American service members, it was more than political rhetoric. It was a warning that something fundamental is being tested. Because what unfolded in that exchange was not simply a debate over foreign policy. It was a deeper confrontation over the very structure of American governance. Booker's argument cuts to the core of the Constitution itself, the principle that no single individual should have the power to commit a nation to large-scale military engagement without the consent of the people's representatives. And yet, here we are. A military operation spanning multiple regions, billions of taxpayer dollars committed. Strategic risks stretching from the Middle East to Europe to Asia. And still, no full congressional authorization. No decisive moment where elected officials stand, vote, and take responsibility for the direction of the country. That absence speaks volumes. Because when power moves forward without accountability, it doesn't just reshape foreign policy, it reshapes the balance of democracy itself. The system of checks and balances, designed to prevent exactly this kind of concentration of authority, begins to erode not with a single dramatic collapse, but with quiet acceptance, with inaction, with silence. Booker's frustration with his colleagues, particularly the accusation that many have chosen compliance over duty, reveals another uncomfortable truth. This is not just about one administration. It is about a long bipartisan pattern. A gradual transfer of power from Congress to the executive branch. A slow normalization of decisions being made behind closed doors without the full transparency the public deserves. But even within that history, Booker made it clear this moment is different. He described it as one of the largest military undertakings in recent memory. He pointed to the scale, the cost, the global consequences, and perhaps most importantly, he connected it directly to the lives already lost. Not as statistics, not as distant figures, but as real human cost, 13 service members who will never return home. And that is where the weight of this moment truly lands. Because behind every policy decision, every strategic calculation, every speech and counter-speech, there are consequences that cannot be reversed. Families changed forever. Futures cut short. A nation carrying the burden of choices made in its name. Yet Booker's critique did not stop at foreign policy. He tied this moment to the realities facing Americans at home: rising costs, strained healthcare systems, economic uncertainty. And in doing so, he exposed a tension that has defined so many moments in American history: the gap between priorities abroad and pressures at home. What does it mean when a nation expands its military commitments while its citizens struggle with basic needs? What does it say about leadership when resources are stretched across global conflicts while domestic concerns continue to grow? These are not easy questions, but they are necessary ones. And perhaps the most striking part of Booker's message was not his criticism of the president, it was his challenge to Congress itself, his insistence that the responsibility does not end with pointing fingers, but begins with action, that lawmakers must reclaim their role, that they must be willing to stand, to vote, to be held accountable. Because without that courage, the system does not function. He spoke of faith over success, of the obligation to remain loyal to the Constitution, even when the political outcome is uncertain. And in that, there is a deeper message, not just for politicians, but for the public as well. A reminder that democracy is not self-sustaining. It requires participation, it requires awareness, it requires pressure from those outside the halls of power to ensure that those inside them do not forget their duty. Booker's belief that the power of the people is greater than the people in power is not just a statement, it is a challenge to engage, to question, to demand accountability. Because when citizens disengage, when oversight fades, when decisions of war and peace are made without full public scrutiny, the consequences extend far beyond a single administration. They shape the future of the republic itself. And as this hearing made clear, that future is still being written. The stakes are no longer theoretical. They are immediate. They are tangible. They are unfolding in real time, across battlefields, across economies, and within the institutions that define the United States. So the question remains, will Congress reassert its authority? Will leaders rise to meet the moment? Will the American people demand clarity, accountability, and a voice in decisions that carry such profound consequences? Or will this moment pass becoming just another step in the quiet expansion of power? History will answer that question, but it will answer it based on what happens next. Because in the end, the strength of a nation is not measured only by its military might, but by its commitment to its own principles, by its willingness to uphold the rule of law, even when it is inconvenient, even when it is difficult. That is the test before us now. And the outcome will define far more than a single conflict. It will define the future of American democracy itself. If you believe in accountability, if you believe in transparency, if you believe that power must answer to the people, then stay informed, stay engaged, and stand for the principles that hold this system together. Subscribe to Liberty Report USA.
The reason why this matters is because we don't have half of the Epstein files. And if the Attorney General is covering this up in such a degree that she is redacting things from Congress, Mr. Speaker, I rise today to discuss this administration's massive cover-up of the Epstein files in order to conceal President Trump's involvement. This cover-up reached its apex last month when Attorney General Pam Bondi falsely testified under oath before the House Judiciary Committee. The Attorney General testified, quote, "There is no evidence that Donald Trump has committed a crime. Everyone knows that," unquote. This is a lie. In the 3 million or so documents that the DOJ has disclosed to Congress under the Epstein Files Transparency Act, there is credible evidence that Donald Trump committed a crime. And that, of course, excludes the nearly 3 million pages that the DOJ is refusing to turn over. Donald Trump is mentioned thousands of times in the Epstein files. There are multiple allegations that he sexually assaulted young girls. But I want to focus on one victim's allegations that the FBI unquestionably found to be credible. The DOJ tried to hide reports of 3 of the 4 interviews that this victim gave to the FBI, but pressure from the media and Congress forced them to disclose them. And now we know why. She credibly accuses Donald Trump of sexually assaulting her when she was between 13 and 15. In each of her interviews, this victim recited the same account of her interaction with Donald Trump. On August 7th, 2019, she explained that she was between 13 and 15 when she was left alone with Donald Trump, who, quote, mentioned something to the effect of, "Let me teach you how little girls are supposed to be." Trump unzipped his pants and put her head down, quote, down to his penis, bit the S out of it. Trump struck the victim and said words to the effect of, "Get this little B the hell out of here." The victim advised that she bit Trump's penis because he disgusted her. She provided some additional details in the next interview 2 weeks later, and then a month later, she met again with the FBI and asked, quote, what the point would be of providing the information at this point in her life when there was a strong possibility nothing could be done about it. She didn't speak to the FBI again. But the FBI certainly found her story credible. In a 21-page PowerPoint presentation that the FBI made to prosecutors, they included this victim's testimony. They would not have done so if they did not find the evidence credible, which means that Attorney General Bondi lied when she stated under oath that there is no evidence that Donald Trump committed a crime. But we're just scratching the surface, because the Epstein files also reveal that Donald Trump has made false statements over the past quarter century about Jeffrey Epstein. We know in 2002, he called him a terrific guy and said, quote, "It is even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side." In a birthday card, 2003, that Donald Trump gave to Jeffrey Epstein for his 50th birthday, Donald wrote for himself that we have certain things in common, Jeffrey. Enigmas never aged. Have you noticed that? A pal is a wonderful thing. Happy birthday. And may every day be another wonderful secret. But in that same year, Palm Beach County opened an investigation into Epstein that eventually was turned over to the FBI. The investigation became public in 2006, and the Palm Beach County police chief received a call quickly after from Donald Trump, where Trump told him, "Thank goodness you're stopping him. Everyone has known he's been doing this." What innocent person calls the police chief about an investigation upon just learning about it? The recent documents also show that Jeffrey Epstein emailed Ghislaine Maxwell and said, quote, "I want you to realize that the dog that hasn't barked is Trump. Redacted victim spent hours at my house with him. He has never once been mentioned." Trump also denied that he ever went on Epstein's plane. But of course, the Southern District of New York said that he was on his plane 8 times, often with young women. The reason why this matters is because we don't have half of the Epstein files. And if the Attorney General is covering this up in such a degree that she is redacting things from Congress, that she then, redacting things from the public that she then shows to Congress, what else is she covering up? And I would just show that this document here was redacted to the public, it was unredacted to Congress, and it completely disputes everything that Donald Trump has said about Jeffrey Epstein, about what he knew about the allegations, about his disgusting behavior, about whether he'd ever been to Epstein's house, saying, I may have been there with my wife. Asked if any young girls were there. No. He may have had children of guests, but that's it. Well, we know that's not the case. Now, why is this important? Because if the Attorney General is covering up this information that she then reveals to Congress, what else is she covering up about Donald Trump's involvement in the Epstein files? I yield back.
Members are reminded to refrain, again, from engaging
in that charged moment on the House floor, Daniel Goldman stood before Congress and laid out a claim that cut straight to the heart of public trust, alleging that unredacted Epstein-related documents shown to lawmakers contradict what Donald Trump has said for years. With deliberate pacing and unmistakable intensity, Goldman didn't just question a narrative. He challenged the credibility of the system itself, pointing to what he described as a divide between what Congress sees and what the American public is allowed to know. He referenced testimony from Pam Bondi, who had stated under oath that there was no evidence of criminal conduct by Trump. Goldman's response was direct and confrontational. He argued that within millions of pages of documents provided under the Epstein Files Transparency Act, there exists material that raises serious questions, material that, according to him, has been partially withheld or redacted before reaching the public eye. This is where the hearing transcended partisan rhetoric and entered a deeper, more unsettling territory. Because at its core, this was no longer just about one individual or one set of allegations, it became a question of transparency versus control, of who decides what truth looks like in a democracy, and whether the mechanisms designed to hold power accountable are themselves being shaped or shielded by that same power. Goldman pointed to inconsistencies, statements made decades ago. Associations once openly acknowledged, now distanced. References to Jeffrey Epstein and his inner circle, including Ghislaine Maxwell, resurfaced not as isolated historical footnotes, but as part of a broader pattern that lawmakers are still trying to piece together. The implication was not simply that facts exist, but that access to those facts may be uneven, filtered, and selectively revealed. And that is where the weight of this moment truly lands. Because when a member of Congress stands on the floor and suggests that information shown to elected officials differs from what is released to the public, it raises a fundamental concern. Is transparency